All right, everybody. So we are here to talk about objection handling and overcoming obstacles, which is something that is always a bit of a challenge to people because people see and think of obstacles and objections as showstoppers. And I think the first thing that I like to share is that objections are actually a very positive thing during the sales cycle. And you've all been through my class, and you know that everything is a sales cycle because every conversation is a selling moment. So having objections is a good thing, and we're going to talk a little bit more about what that means. But having objections lets us know that there's actually interest. Another way I like to say that is, okay, having objections lets us know that are we okay? I hear some voice. Are we okay? Okay. Having objections also lets us know that, as I like to say, that there's a pulse out there. So now, one of my great thoughts, or I should say, a great perspective on objection handling is it is the basis for a course that I teach on coaching called Coaching Not Telling. And Michael Oliver said this. And by the way, I have no idea who Michael Oliver is. I just found this by perfect chance one day. And I just love this. If you choose to tell people things, people will tell you in the form of resistance and rejection. And I like to say, or add on to that, they'll tell you things in the form of objections as well. So I think one of the things that we want to start doing is getting the word tell, T-E-L-L, out of our vocabulary because, nobody likes to be told anything. Nobody likes to hear the words, look, let me just tell you what to do, because there's nothing nutritional in the word tell. So if nothing else, get rid of that word from your vocabulary. It's like getting rid of the word but and replacing it with the word and. And again, you were all in my workshop. You understand what that means in the context of every conversation is a selling moment. So objections are often, heard in the term, in the word no. And, when we hear the word no, far too often people think it's like a shutdown. Can't go any further, go away, don't ever come back. And objections actually mean a couple of things. When you're getting objections, it rarely means a complete and absolute no. And I think that's an important point here that everybody really begin to embrace. When you hear the word no, or something that feels like a no, or a euphemism for the word no, which we'll talk about in a second, objections actually often have a deeper meaning to them. So it might mean you need to meet my needs better, which means there's more work needed. It might mean you don't understand my needs well enough, which again, it means more conversation, more discovery, more relationship building. Often an objection, even though it won't be framed like this, is simply an invitation to learn more. An objection might mean, and this is one that people often make a mistake, I'm not the right person to make the decision. Because, there's often people who want you to think they are the person in charge. They are the decision maker. They are the big cheese, as we say, and they're really not. And often we hear a no or an objection. It's the same thing. Hearing the word no is nothing more than another way of giving you an objection. It might mean, you know what, I'm not the right person to take a risk. I'm not willing to take a risk, or I can't take a risk. And I think this is a really important point to remember, because we always have to be diligent about, are we speaking to the right people? So objections, candidly, are simply a reason to keep selling. And since my world is all about building a sales culture and every conversation is a selling moment, I think another way to frame this is objections are simply a reason to keep the conversation going. Because if you don't have enough information, or they're not the right person, or the person's afraid to make a change, or any one of the things I just mentioned a moment ago, well, guess what? You need to keep the conversation going, and every conversation is a selling moment. There's often things that we mistake for objections. There are euphemisms. I was told no, I got pushback, oh, my presentation didn't go so well, I was rejected. By the way, that word rejection is a terrible word. I don't believe in it. I don't believe in rejection in a business setting, because rejection is a personal thing. People don't come up to you and say, I'm not buying from you because I reject you. There are reasons why people don't do business with us. And unless there are indications that it's personal, I think it's safe for us all to believe that there is an opportunity to do more digging. Now, you've heard me say this in my workshop. You never want to say the word but. You always want to replace it with the word and. You know, when we hear objections and the next thing you say is but what you're really saying here is I'm not buying into your objection. I'm not listening to what you're saying. So we're going to talk about the most important thing you can do to handle this so that you don't say the word but, and what the word and does, the impact that it has on people when you're handling objections. Now, remember to mute your phones, please, if you haven't already done so. So the word but erases everything that's been said. So remember this. You want to get rid of the word but when you're handling objections and looking to overcome obstacles. This is a big deal. So when we're handling objections, it's also important to know that look, I'm a fairly straightforward person. Most of you all know me at this point. There's not a whole lot of gray area sometimes with me. So I'm going to categorize people today. Now, by the way, this is not the final word. So this could create a lot of additional conversation, but I want to categorize people one of two ways to make it simple for us just today for the context of handling objections and overcoming obstacles, which is we're typically going to run into what I call high reactors and low reactors. You know, high reactors are the people who go, oh my God, this is great. And they're constantly giving you feedback or no, or yes, or whatever it might be. And then you're going to have low reactors. These are the people who sort of listen to you. They stare. They don't show a lot of expression. You hope that they're still alive actually when you're talking to them. Chances are they are. And the challenge with handling high reactors and low reactors is that we can't completely stake our beliefs in how they're listening to what they're and how they're hearing and how they're listening to us based on how they're reacting. So I think the message here is that when it comes to objections and when it comes to selling in general, and we know that every conversation is a selling moment, it's important to understand, folks, that the way people are reacting is not necessarily going to be an indication of how they're going to handle the objections and how they're going to receive your ability to handle the objection. So let's keep moving on here a little bit. Objections typically occur as a result of unanswered questions missed earlier in the sales cycle or in the conversation cycle or in the relationship building cycle or in the networking cycle. As you know, every conversation is a selling moment. Every conversation is a networking moment. Every conversation is a coaching opportunity. Objections can pop up anywhere along the road. This is why addressing the objection matters. This is why it matters not to take it personally. And this is why objections are a good thing. It lets you know that there's life out there. People are with you. And whether they're a high reactor or a low reactor, you can't get thrown off by what kind of reactor they are. So here's the first lesson of handling objections, because there are so many things that are written out there about handling objections. Let me say the first reaction is to do this. Breathe. Just breathe, step back, think. Don't react. Because what we're trying to do here, folks, is find the hidden reason why we're getting the objection. We're not going to do that by running in and finishing people's sentences. We're not going to get to a resolution by running in and answering questions that have yet to be asked. You know, one of the things that I see people do so wrong so often that absolutely sabotages their ability to effectively handle objections is they talk too quick. They offer a solution too fast. They interrupt the objection. And what they wind up doing? We wind up creating more objections when in fact we didn't have to do that. So breathe, step back, think, then react. So continuing along that same line of thought, there are 3 things you must do to get this right. There are 3 things that you must master to become a master at objection handling. Breathe, maintain eye contact, and listen more than you speak. In fact, if you're thinking about, wait a minute, didn't we cover this in my workshop? Yes, we did. It's called being present. You see how this all circles back. This all comes full circle. Being present, breathing, listening, not reacting too quickly, not taking the bait, as it were, are all secrets to objection handling. It can be so much easier than we make it. Another secret is keep calm and don't take it personally. If people are creating objections, they're raising objections, they're creating obstacles for you, remember those 5 reasons why it might be happening. Not enough information, not the right person, unwilling to take a chance. Those things, guess what? Those are great reasons to understand that there are other things going on, and guess what? It's not personal. Don't take it personally. Okay, so knowing that, going forward, what are the common mistakes of objection handling? Boy, there are plenty. Number 1, getting defensive. People hear an objection, they take it personally, they make it a personal insult, and we get defensive. And you know what happens when people get defensive? Everybody loses, everybody shuts down. Second reason, not listening and missing what the real issue is. Number 3, not being patient. Remember, breathe, step back, be patient, and listen. Number 4, offering the solution too early. If you offer a solution before you know what the problem was, you've just made the problem worse. Anxiety driving the reaction. We have got to manage our anxieties during the objection handling phase. And then number 6, overexuberance. Oh my gosh, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, shuts down the listening channels. In other words, if you become overexuberant in offering your solution, your chances are you're going to miss the real issue. And then it becomes a vicious circle. You know, it's interesting. I thought about my own reasons in my sales history, in my conversation history, in my relationship building history, where I have fallen short on objection handling. And for me, it's been number 1 and it's been number 4. That's where I've always suffered the biggest failures of objection handling. Of these 6, where have you been guilty? Where have you found your challenges? So, what are the 3 stages of objection handling? Well, you want to ask, you want to probe, and you want to confirm. So you want to make sure you're asking a lot of questions. You're asking questions until you understand the objection. And then we're going to learn to restate what you've just heard so that you're both on the same page. In other words, asking and asking and asking means you're no longer being the sales apologist. I know you remember that from our workshop. So, 3 steps: acknowledging, reframing, and rephrasing. Number 1, acknowledge, acknowledge, acknowledge. The number 1 most important thing you can do when somebody raises an objection or hands you an obstacle or sounds like they're not on the same page as you is not to get defensive. It's not to get upset. It's not to get your back up. It's not to feel anything other than the need to acknowledge. I acknowledge your concern, and I hear your concern, and I understand that your concern is, and. Look what's at the end of every line here. The word and, not but. We've all been in a position where someone has said to us, look, I hear you, but. Well, I understand what you're saying, but. Well, what they're saying is you're wrong and they're right. And guess what? That's a big but. That's not going to get anybody anywhere. You see, acknowledging means you're stepping into the objection. You're being okay. You're confident. You're being vulnerable. Remember what we talked about, vulnerability. That is a sign of strength. Vulnerability is strength. Acknowledge, acknowledge, acknowledge. Step into the objection. Be okay with acknowledging and embracing it. Because when people voice an objection, don't forget that it's very likely they're just looking to be heard. You don't have to fix anything. What I'm asking you to do is humanize the objection. Demonstrate empathy, maybe some sympathy and understanding. And what you're doing is you're showing people that you're listening. Step back, breathe, acknowledge, and listen. You know, if you can get this one point and you can train yourselves to always humanize the objection, you know, I understand what you're saying and I have been there as well. By the way, we do this in our personal lives. Acknowledge, acknowledge, acknowledge. If you get nothing else from today's webinar, and I hope that you'll get plenty, write that down. Acknowledge, step into the objection, and then humanize it. Show people that you get it, that you've been there as well. The second step of objection handling is to reframe it. You know, when people articulate an objection to you or hand you an obstacle, it's not uncommon that you and that individual will be, as we say, on a different page. In other words, you want to make sure that you're demonstrating that you're listening and you understand what they're saying. That's why we ask open-ended questions. That's why we constantly acknowledge. So a reframe simply means that you are working to make sure that you're both on the same page, that you're saying the same thing, that you're both in agreement. So once you're done listening, or as you continue to listen, preface your questions with, so that I understand you, your concern is, or in other words, your concern is, would it be fair to say that your concern is? In other words, what you're looking to do is have people say, yes, you hear me. Yes, you understand. Yes, you get it. Wow, we're on the same page. So reframing is nothing more than creating common agreement. Write that down. The reframe is creating common agreement. The final stage is the easiest, believe it or not, because acknowledgement can be hard because we have to train ourselves to stop talking. Reframing means that we have to be listening very actively. You have to be an active listener and making sure that you're reframing in a way that you can get common agreement. Now I just want you to restate it so that you can gain agreement for a solution going forward. Now that you know in your mind what you can do to solve, mitigate, enhance, fix the objection, whatever it might be, now you can offer your solution. But if you do this too early, it means you haven't acknowledged and you haven't reframed. You're not on the same page. So don't go to this step until you are sure that you're on the same page. So you might say, okay, so we can mitigate your concern by doing, now you can offer your solution. Would you agree that a way to handle this would be to? Would it be acceptable to redefine this issue and solve it this way? You see, what you're doing with these is you're creating open-ended opportunities to continue the conversation. Objection handling doesn't always have to have a firm ending. The best people who are skilled at handling objections keep the conversation going, and they understand the true secret of objection handling, which I'm going to share with you in just a few minutes. So we want to handle objections by creating conversations. Don't get defensive. Don't fix something that isn't broken. Don't create more objections before you understand the objection at hand. which is why you want to make sure that you become skilled at asking open-ended questions. These are questions that you cannot answer with a yes or a no. These are questions that promote conversation, that keep the conversation moving so that you can, in fact, learn more. You see, the more you learn, the more likely you are to be able to acknowledge, reframe, and restate the objection. You want to get ahead of the objection. Well, how do you do that? If you are consistently communicating with people, you should see objections coming your way. You should constantly be seeking agreement along the way. Remember what we talked about with the sales apologist. The sales apologist is afraid to ask. You can't become the sales apologist in the course of building a relationship, in the course of closing the opportunity. It's wonderful if you're doing small closes along the way. Do you see this as a way to go forward? Well, when we deliver the product, well, and when you get the contract, in other words, things that you can say to give rise to potential objections. Addressing possible issues by constantly asking. I think another way to frame this is don't assume anything. Communicate obsessively is what I like to say. Always be seeking agreement. Never stop asking. When we talk about objection handling, we all learned what a sales culture mindset means. Means that we're all in the mindset that every conversation is a selling moment. Remember your virtual team? These are the people that help you help the client say yes. These are the people that you turn to help you impact and influence to get the result that you mutually want. Well, your virtual team also helps you handle objections. Don't take objections on by yourself. Take on the objections that you can effectively resolve. Turn to your virtual team to help you with other objections. Handling objections and obstacles is your opportunity also to really get more out of the conversation. You see, listening is critical. And if you're listening, the nuggets, the pieces, the gold is there. You have to find them, and you find them through open-ended questions. Strong relationships encourage and allow you to ask those questions. Sales, relationships, and objections are not a game of subtexts. Just ask. You've earned the right. Don't be the sales apologist. Now, everybody take a deep breath and get present. Because I want to share with you now the big secret to handling objections and obstacles. And this is so simple, and this is what's missed. Do you know that many objections and obstacles resolve themselves through communication and patience by the person raising them? So let's talk about that. Think about it for a second. If you think of yourselves as a facilitator of conversation, a facilitator of the relationship, and objections and obstacles are raised, don't fix it. Encourage conversation around it. Do you know that often when people have the opportunity to think about, discuss, and flesh out in their own minds and verbally the objection, often people say, wait a minute, I got it. It's not really a problem, and this is how we can do it. It's amazing what happens when we simply take the position of being the person to facilitate the conversation, not fix the objection. It's amazing. It's like spinning a top. And you know what a top does? It spins and spins and spins, and eventually it just poops out. It falls over. Well, imagine that is an objection. It's spinning and spinning and spinning and has all this energy, and the more you discuss it, the more you contemplate it, the more you facilitate open-ended questions, the more likely the objection will simply resolve itself. It's amazing and so much fun when it happens. And you don't have to do anything other than be present. Another way of saying this is objection handling is organic. In other words, often the resolution is right there. The conversation that you facilitate will help bring it about. Don't jump in, get defensive, and fix something and raise more problems. Just be a great listener, be present, and keep the conversation flowing. Constantly be probing, constantly be acknowledging, constantly be reframing, restate, and guess what happens? You'll find the answer organically. So when we talk about objections and the no, objections are rarely a showstopper. Conversation and communication is key. Patience and listening are mandatory. That's how we get the green light. So as I said in the keynote, as I say in my workshops, as I say in all of my work, just the facts. Stay with the facts. You see, you can't handle objections effectively if we let emotion get in the way. And how does emotion get in the way? We get defensive. We figure we know an answer to the problem when perhaps we don't know fully what the problem is. Let the objection resolve itself. Because you see, great objection handling is selling. Every conversation is a selling moment. You've heard me say that over and over and over again. And it is. In fact, remember from the workshop when I said I articulated to you those 21 human behaviors. They were in the special report that I shared with you called Smashing the Sales Stereotype. One of those 21 behaviors that was front and center was objection handling. You see, when you handle objections, you're selling because you're influencing people to make a decision in your favor. You're influencing people to help you build a better relationship with you. And ladies and gentlemen, that's it. There's no more bigger secret to this than that. There's nothing more to objection handling than being present, probing, acknowledging, reframing, restating, and most importantly, facilitating. Listen and allow people to solve the problem on their own because it may not be a problem. And don't get defensive. Don't take it personally and don't take it as an attack on you or your services because that's a problem. If we do that, if we let that happen, we send the message that we disagree with them. And like I believe human relationships, most people simply want to be heard. They don't need to be right. They just want to be heard. So I'm going to unmute everybody. And are there any questions?
Todd, I was going to ask, it's Graham here.
Hey, Graham.
When you get the objection, sorry, we don't have budget for that this year, or we don't have budget for that 2019. How do you suggest handling that? Because that's obviously a big barrier.
Yeah, that's a big, look, that's the age-old objection, right? We don't have the money, we don't have the money, we don't have the money. And, so obviously if you go by what I'm saying, you acknowledge, you say something like, yeah, I get it. It's that time of the year and we're hearing budget issues from everybody. And tell me more about how you normally budget. Tell me when you do budgeting. You see, I would get them talking about the budgeting process, Graham, because what happens is you may be able to find ways to do creative billing, creative invoicing, creative cash collection, whatever it might be. And often people, if they really want your service, if they're really bought into it, my belief is, and I have to say in 30 some odd years of doing this, money can be found. They're looking for ways to work with you to do it creatively. Does that help?
Yep, that's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, there is no silver bullet answer to that one. And by the way, I also want to say when it comes to the age-old money objection, people often throw that up as a smokescreen for something else.
Yep.
So like right now, look, it's November and I have clients calling me and saying, I want to book you, but we're out of budget, or I have money I need to spend this year. I like, by the way, I like the latter one better than the former, you know,
Yeah.
you know, but often, so I'm first thing I say is, okay, what's the best way for you to pay invoices that keep this below the radar? And they start thinking and they go, and then and all of a sudden we come up, I don't want to say all of a sudden, Graham, but we're able to come up with creative invoicing that makes everybody happy, right? Or we're able to find a way to say, you know, work within how and when they do their budgets. And the other thing to do, Graham, I'm sorry, I could talk about this forever, right? The other thing we're able to do is find out where else they're spending money and say, you know, for what I'm charging, you're already paying this for that, or you're already having so in my case as a speaker, I'll say, well, what are you charging people per head? Really? Well, an extra $5 pays for me. Oh gosh, I never thought about that. I mean, there's all kinds of creative ways that you can do it. They're looking to you for creativity. I think that's the point that I'm trying to make here.
Okay. It's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah. And if you'd like to talk about this one-on-one, do not ever hesitate to call me if you want to talk about specific objections.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions, folks?
Well, maybe in the same line, Todd, because there's the budget sometimes, and sometimes there's other stuff that's coming up with the right person. She or he is ready to buy from you, but then all of a sudden it's not a priority. There's something urgent come up, or okay, so we're gonna push it next month, and
Yep.
So how do you stay on top of their mind without being obnoxious, or you know what I mean?
Well, okay. So great question. So the answer is you do it subtly and firmly, correct? So the thing you don't want to do is constantly be bombarding people. When, right? We all know that, right? You don't want to do that. I mean, I have a dear friend who just started a bakery chocolate, mail order company, and she is sending out 4 emails a day. Now I like chocolate, but not that much. And I finally wrote her yesterday and I said, you are turning off your customers because you're overdoing it. So how do you stay on somebody's windshield? Well, the first answer and the most reliable answer is at the basic level, what kind of a relationship do you have with that person? Have you really invested enough in building a relationship with that person so that when you do communicate with them, it's received? In other words, they're part of your virtual team. As you remember, we talked about that, as opposed to you're a burden. That's the first thing. Second of all is asking people when would be the right time, how would be the right time, even though they may give you an answer that isn't necessarily correct or isn't or may change. The fact of the matter is you're sending the message that I'm respecting you, and how and when do you want me to follow up with you? The other thing that you can do is always be looking for objective ways to stay on their windshield. An article that's of interest, something, doing a newsletter, doing something that may be of interest to them, and never being the sales apologist. There is no one answer. If you have a relationship and you know the person and you know what makes them tick and you've invested the time in the relationship, then that earns you the right to not be the sales apologist and be a little more forward, and you won't be seen as being a pain in the neck, as it were. Every person is different. Every person is a balancing act, which is why I'm so emphatic about the deeper and better the relationship, the more likely you are to have earned the right to stay on their windshield. So instead of thinking about tactics, think about the depth of the relationship. Does that help?
Yeah, that helps, but it comes to my mind another question and sometimes often it's like really turnover is important. So maybe you're building in this relationship with this person, and then oops, all of a sudden they disappear because they went somewhere else, or so you have to find another person in the same organization to follow up with.
Right. Well, and let's remember that we can only control the controllable, right? I mean, if somebody just this week, the chief information officer of one of my biggest accounts, who's been a wonderful patron of mine for years and is a very difficult person to sell to,
Mm.
But I've spent years building a relationship with him. I found out through the grapevine that he was let go. I mean, didn't even know it. And I had, a $50,000 proposal sitting on his desk. That won't happen. I can't control him leaving, right? So now I've got to spend time and work on that. Now, the first thing I did was I reached out to him and said, what can I do for you? How can I help you? You've always been good to me. I've relied on the relationship. He's part of my virtual team. And he said to me, without me prompting him, look, I know that proposal was sitting on my desk. I know who's getting the job. He's a great guy. He likes me. I like him. Let me intercede on your behalf. I didn't even have to ask. So I would suggest to you, how strong is your virtual team within your accounts? And does your virtual team go deep as well as go broad across the organization?
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And I have to tell you, that has always saved my neck. It's not a guarantee, and there is no guarantee of objection handling in any one case. Look, you're going to find people who are going to say, too expensive, get out, never come back. It's going to be rare that happens, right? And you're going to find people once in a blue moon that simply are intractable. And if we gave up at every objection, none of us would be selling anything. Remember what could be behind the objection, and I encourage everybody to keep the conversation moving. Just ask somebody, how can we keep this conversation moving?
Okay.
The more vulnerable and approachable you are, the more vulnerable and approachable they'll allow themselves to be. They don't want to be sold. They likely do want to buy. That's what I'm going to suggest that we remember.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah. Again, there's no silver bullet. It's patience, time, acknowledgement, breathing, and being, and not giving up, and letting them voice and continually be heard by you.
Thanks.
Anybody else? Okay. I hope this was helpful. As I said, there's no silver bullet. I wish there was. All the books in the world on objection handling will not tell you to do the one thing that I believe is the most important, which is just acknowledge and breathe and lean on and depend on your ability to build that relationship. So on that, I wish you all a great day. I'll have this recording ready so you can listen to it again and share it with your companies and do what you like with it, except for obviously delete it. And on that note, have a great day, everybody.
Thank you,
Thank
Todd.
you very much,
Take
Todd.
care.
Thanks.